You've landed at Spark Launch, the guide star for embracing what it means to be neurodiverse. I'm Mike Cornell, joined by CEO of Spark Launch, Chaya. Here, we navigate mental health triumphs and tribulations from all across the spectrum, charting a course through the shared experiences that unite us, and discovering how to embody the unique strengths within neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, igniting your spark and launching it into a better tomorrow. Hello there, I'm Mike.
I'm Chaya.
And I want to welcome onto the show Jay Goth, a seasoned C-level executive with experience in technology, energy, finance, and healthcare. He currently holds the position of CEO at Burble Creativity Inc., a company dedicated to improving children's lives, specifically the neurodivergent, through storytelling. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And children stood out for me. And we are on the same mission here at Spark Launch. They are our future. And we have to help them feel comfortable so that they can show up at their true potential, their fullest potential. And so tell us how you got on this journey and what motivated you to be here, to do what you're doing, and what your company does and what they offer for neurodivergent children.
Sure. Well, it's kind of an interesting story of how I got here because I've been a serial entrepreneur. I've been involved in a lot of projects. They've always been kind of socially related. So I was involved in a renewable energy project back in the late 90s, early 2000s, before green energy became a thing. I am currently running a lab here in Southern California that does genomic sequencing, and we're trying to help launch genomic sequencing startups for precision medicine. And I was a small business development consultant when I met Taylor Cole, the founder of Burble. And Taylor is actually the chief technology officer of a naval warfare base here in Southern California, but he's really a genius when it comes to thinking outside the box. And when he was in the Naval Strategic Think Tank for a couple of years, he kept thinking, there's got to be a better way to tell a story. There's got to be a better way to express a story that really captures the imagination. And so he came to me when I was a consultant and he said, I've got this idea about storytelling and I'd like to tell you about it, and you tell me if you think there's a business behind it. And so I said I'd be happy to do that. We had lunch, and he kind of explained the concept of minimally defined immersive storytelling. And what it is you don't tell a complete story. You tell parts of a story, and you leave out pieces so that people can fill them in with their imagination. And while you're telling the story, you're in an immersive environment where you have sounds like going around you, and you have lighting that's changing. And he told me this, and I said, well, it seems to me like it's kind of like the old ancient days when we'd look into campfires and tell stories. And as you were telling the story, everyone was imagining their own thing, looking into a fire. And he said, that's exactly it. That's what I'm trying to create. And I said, I think there's a business there. I can definitely see that. I've never heard of anything like this. So he ran with the concept. He had some friends and family invest in the business back in 2016 and 2017. And he began developing the business. He asked me to join his board of directors, which I did. And for 7 years, he's been developing a great product, but he never really got any commercial traction. And he was all over the place. He was thinking this would be great for meditation. He was always engaged with children because he had an audio processing disorder. So while he's not autistic, I would say he's probably somewhere spectrum adjacent. And he really does think that there's a way to improve children's lives through this immersive storytelling. And I agreed. And after 7 years of R&D, I said, we've got to get a product to market. So I decided to invest a lot of my own money, help him get the company ready. And we're now in the process of doing a crowdfunding campaign so that we can start bringing these tents to market. In the meantime, we've done hundreds of demonstrations of our prototypes. And as we were doing the demonstrations, we had all kinds of kids coming in for the storytelling sessions. And what was remarkable was that kids that were on the spectrum really, really enjoyed it. And it actually got a lot of the kids to calm down and relax. In fact, in one case, a child went through the storytelling experience, went home and slept through the night for the first time in his life. And we've had kids that were playing video games and they put their games down and say, "Can I go back in the story tent?" So we can see that there's really a need for this. And the parents that have had their children in the tents have said, "When can I get one?" So we really need to bring this product to market. And that's kind of how this whole situation evolved.
Thank you for sharing. And speaking to so many neurodivergent adults here on our podcast, we know that the environment plays a massive role in their inner peace. And so what you're doing in the process of storytelling, you're creating an environment that is soothing, that is calming in a way that it affects their internals, that they can actually sleep and feel at ease and peace that it brings. And so I can see that. I can see why it's going to work.
We've actually had a couple of studies, not empirical research studies, the true studies that would get like Medicare or Medicaid approved or anything like that. But we have had some studies done with Loma Linda and a group out of Washington where they've just done, cognitive studies just to see what happens with these kids. And they have noticed a good decrease. And they've actually had some suggestions for us that we want to incorporate about how different tones and different frequencies and lighting frequencies, there's a lot of research on it. And we want to start incorporating that into the tents as well. So one of the reasons that we're raising money is so that we can go out and actually conduct real valid research with some of these clinicians. We've been approached by several groups that really want to dive into this and see how can we fine tune this and really help. But just, just through trial and error, we've seen a lot of response, and it'll be great to, improve as we go.
That's incredible. Yeah. What is it you feel, like your personal opinion, feel is about the story tent that neurodivergent children specifically connect so strongly with it?
It's really funny because a lot of times you talk to people and they say, kids don't like loud noises who are on the spectrum, and I want to say right up front, I understand that every child is different. So, what works for one child may not work for another child. So, we're going to offer a guarantee so that they can try the tent at home. And if it doesn't work for any reason, we're going to give them their money back because we're really a mission-driven company. But what I think it is it's a combination of all three of these things: the lighting, moving around and creating different atmospheres, the sounds that accompany the story. So you're getting kind of like sound effects going on. So if we're talking about a dragon, you may hear a roaring sound or something like that. But we won't call it a dragon. We'll call it a thing that comes up out of a cave and things like that. And by them actually using their imagination, instead of looking at a screen where something is already programmed and they're looking at somebody else's reality, I think they're creating their own reality out of the experience. And I think that's the really the magic. The minimally defined immersive storytelling aspect is really the magic. So you got to have all three. It's just not just one or the other.
Now, the sound, is that something that they could control? What kind of a sound they can play?
Yeah, we have an app that runs the tent, so it can be run off a phone or a tablet. And you can actually create personal preferences. So if you don't like loud noises or you want certain things, we can have it so that can be programmed in. And then this is all, in development. I can't say that we have a final finished product right now. And that's part of the reason we're going with an intentional approach to bringing our product to market. Our goal is to fund 500 tents. We've already got a waiting list on our website of parents who want to buy these tents, of over 500 people. So we've got a lot of people who want the tents. We want to get 500 out into the market to what I call early adopters. And then we want them to give us the feedback on what works in the tents and what doesn't, because as we've done all these demonstrations, we have a pretty good idea of the basics, but we haven't really fine-tuned it. So we get those 500 tents out, we get the feedback from these early adopters, and then we go into final design for a commercial tent where we want to do like 10,000 tents. But now we know that we've got something that will be optimized for the families. At that point, when we start those 10,000, we want to deliver 500. The first 500 are going to go to those early adopters so that they get the new and improved model. But at the same time, we're going to ask them to donate those original 500 to their local autism programs so that they can go to families who need the technology but maybe can't afford the $500 for the tent.
Sound has frequency, right? It's emitting frequency. And that's why when you go on a noisy street, it's going to feel annoying. And especially neurodivergent folks are so sensitive to sound and environment that we are always craving for that soothing noise or sound, because that frequency, it's actually that high level frequency. And I know I use that in my meditation. That's why meditation music is always at a higher frequency, because it's actually, there's a lot of energy that's being transmitted through that sound, the sound waves, and it's entering our system without our knowledge. And so I love this idea of creating that, because it matters. It's not just having a good night's sleep. That is super important, but it's more than that. It impacts how you think, how you feel, because that's how you're going to show up the next day.
There are certain frequency ranges that are optimal for people who are neurodivergent. So you can set frequency ranges. And we did a lot of work with a clinical worker up in Washington who was helping guide us on what frequencies we wanted to stay within and what frequencies we wanted to avoid. And the same is true with light, right? Because you go into a stark, bright area and it you just get this feeling, this anxiety. We don't want to promote that. We want a soothing light. We want frequencies that are more geared towards bringing the energy level down and letting people, enjoy the moment. And one of the things that I didn't mention is that as the child goes through the story and maybe it's bedtime and they're ready to go to sleep, we have a sleep mode, which is very cool. So now we can have the stars come out over them, and we can have the wind through the trees or the rushing stream, or, whatever they want to program in, whatever they like to sleep to. So we're really working on more than just the storytelling aspect. We want to move them into what we call sleep mode.
I want to ask, do you have different sizes? Is it just for one person, for multiple kids, for a parent and a child? Is it for adults? All these questions are.
That's a great question, Chaya, because we have found that, we did a whole bunch of prototypes and we tried all kinds. We even had entire rooms where we could bring in, 10 to 12 people and experience it together. We had one set up in a youth innovation center here in Riverside County, California, where we had Wednesday afternoon was storytelling hour. And we'd have families come in and we'd pack the tent with 10 or 12 people and we'd tell the stories and everyone would enjoy it. And then they go out. What we're going with initially is we want to produce a tent in two sizes. One tent would fit everything from a child's bed up to, say, a queen size bed, and then we'll have a bigger one that would go over a king size bed. So if you want to put it over a large bed so that the family can be involved, but the whole idea is you usually want an adult in with the child doing the storytelling. In fact, we have story books where they can bring in a physical book if they want and go through the story together. And I think, bonding like that is so important. And I just don't think a lot of times, in our hectic modern world, we spend enough time with our children. So we're hoping that will help, create a better bonding experience as well.
I love that it goes over the bed and it's not separate from the bed, and bonding is so important. Parent and child bond is one of the most precious relationships. And when you cultivate that relationship right from childhood, it'll play out into when they are teenagers and adults. And from what you're saying, the tent grows with them, right? It doesn't stop if they're a teenager or if they're an adult. I think
Yeah.
I think we should be able to be allowed to take that into adulthood. Right?
Oh, believe me, we've all taken a lot of naps inside these tents.
And what I love is imagination for for any child is so important, but for neurodivergent kids, their imagination can be so active, and it can be their like primary way of communicating for many of them. When I was a kid, I would get lost sometimes in my own imagination. But what I love about this and the way you're going about it and the way you're going about the storytelling involved in it is it creates autonomy for the imagination, where while they're being told a story, they're still in control of how the story plays out in their minds. They are able to be like fully immersed into what's happening. So it feels less like they're experiencing it on a screen, they're reading it in a book. It was technically inappropriate for me to be reading as a child, but I read a lot of H.P. Lovecraft as a kid. Part of the reason is because I really liked his descriptions, which weren't really describing anything. Like everything was indescribable, blah, blah, blah. And I latched onto that because I loved being able to build the stuff in my head instead. I never liked overly descriptive prose, in storytelling. So I loved being able to do that. And like that, it's reminded me a lot of that, instead of saying, there is a dragon coming out of a cave, saying there is this thing coming out of the cave, and the child, whatever they're personally into, can kind of latch onto that. And I really love the flexibility of storytelling being used in that way.
Yeah, that was all Taylor. I mean, that's part of his background because, like a lot of neurodivergent children, he wasn't diagnosed until he was an adult. So everyone thought he was slow or he had some kind of disability. No, he just thought different. And what we want to do is tap into these superpowers that many of these kids have. I mean, I've talked to a lot of parents of children who are, everything from nonverbal to mildly autistic. And what I've found just through interacting with them is, these kids are incredibly intelligent and what they're looking for is a way to express themselves. And unfortunately, we stifle that a lot of times. Like when we tell them, be quiet, watch TV, be quiet, play with your tablet, I want to encourage them to explore their imagination and really, in a positive way. And that's kind of what Burbles is really all about, is just giving kids the ability to unleash their imagination and look at life in the way that they want to.
Yeah, imagination is so important, as Mike said, and all that creativity comes from imagination, right? And for creativity to develop, it has to be in the right environment. It cannot happen when you're busy, when it's noisy. It just happens magically in the right frequency, in the right environment. So it's amazing that you're creating that environment for them and allowing those thoughts and ideas to come. And you never know where they go, but at least they're able to develop them.
Exactly. And what we're really trying to do is build, at the same time as building a company, we want to build a community. So one of the things I've learned talking to people, as I'm sure you run into as well, is, that sense of community, that you're not alone in this, and that there's other people you can talk to and relate to and help. So one of the things that we're working on right now is building an online community platform where people in this community can actually lead it. And that's why, I'm a former investment banker and I ran a small biotech fund. So I come from the finance world and, I could take this to traditional venture finance or something like that. That's not what we want. We want a community built around the company. And that's why we're doing the crowdfunding. we want the community to invest in the company and for us all to be invested together in growing this community, the imagination of children. And we want to partner with other groups like Spark Launch and companies that are involved in helping these children find their path. And through that effort, I just think we can really help, like I say in our marketing material, bring needed comfort to millions of children.
Yeah. And these children have incredible gifts. I can't remember this podcast, but I can't even remember who mentioned that, whether I don't know if it was you, Jay, in our previous conversation or somebody else, but it's about how autistic children can communicate telepathically. And there's a whole series on that where they can completely read somebody's mind without a word of communication. And they get the numbers right. They get everything right by just looking at them. And so they have incredible potential to invent and create in the future. And so what we are doing is so important, not just for them, but for humanity in general, because you have to be able to create something that doesn't exist, right? And that is true creation when we are evolving and creating from love. Everything is a creation. This podcast right now is a creation. And when you create with the right intentions, magic happens.
Agreed. And, you talk about these super gifted people. I saw a story of a 9-year-old girl in Mexico, and they realized that she had a special gift, and she's now a consultant with NASA. So she's a rocket scientist at 9 years old. And she was originally, everyone thought that she was never going to amount to anything because she couldn't express herself properly. So as we get there, I had another gentleman whose son is nonverbal, and all of a sudden, for years they thought, he's never going to be able to communicate. And then they found this machine that lets the child communicate through his hands. And he started talking with people, and he became fluent in Spanish in 3 weeks. And it's just amazing how with the right tools we can get people somewhere. And just this morning, I read about a researcher who tried a very inexpensive drug that's being used for chemotherapy for cancer patients. And they gave a very small dose to a nonverbal autistic child. And in 3 days, he was actually forming words. The amazing things that are happening today. I started a Medium channel where I'm just compiling all the news I see every day of advances in diagnosis of autism. It's part of Burble Creativity, but we have a Medium page where we just are constantly throwing stories in there from all kinds of places. It's just an amazing world when you look at it.
Yeah, because it's always the methodologies that we actually that we get dinged at, right? Even in the real world, today's world, in the adult world, because we do things differently. And when you are asking a child or an adult to do it a certain way that's working for everybody else, that's where the disability comes, right? So if you let go of the methodologies and allow the information to come in whatever way, it will, right? Because we're all human beings and we have amazing powers, and technology has helped us so much, even from a simple spreadsheet, right? So I can't imagine what other inventions are happening to help these children.
I know, isn't it? It's an exciting time, really, with the, everyone's into this whole artificial intelligence thing, but the fact of the matter is, if you can assume huge amounts of data and utilize that to find new ways to do things, then I think, the world is going to be much brighter. I mean, the whole precision medicine idea, I've been involved in that for 12 years. And it was so difficult at the beginning because we didn't have the artificial intelligence aspect of being able to assimilate all the genomic sequencing data. I mean, it's a huge amount of data in the human genome, But now we can look at that data and parse out the things that we need so that we can find a treatment or a new diagnostic or a drug. A friend of mine started a company that is looking at breast cancer, and he's right now in the clinic developing a diagnostic that will find breast cancer at stage 0, which means before there's even a tumor or the cells are even starting to clump together, he can see that there is a breast cancer beginning in the body. And now, if you can treat it that early, we can eliminate a lot of pain and suffering. So it's like you say, technology is just a great friend.
The advancements being made, specifically like cancer screening, have just in the last few years have like continually made these giant leaps that are absolutely incredible.
And they're doing the same thing with autism, which is great. I've seen like early point technology that uses eye movement to determine autism. There's a new diagnostic based upon gait that sees how you're walking. They can tell, and as we progress, then it'll be great, because if we can find out at 6 months that this child may have a neurodevelopmental disorder, then maybe we can start treating the child differently than what you were saying, Chaya, where, you just plop them into, okay, preschool, okay, kindergarten, okay, first grade. And it's like, no, this child needs a different approach to growing up in their life. And if we can start doing that, then it's going to be amazing what we produce.
Yeah, it's disability, but by somebody else's standards. There's
right.
Like I have things that would be defined as disabilities or disabling in some way, but it's only because the standards that it's up against are not built for someone like me. So that makes them disabling, but in fact, they're just, it's like anything else, any other problem somebody has, or, issues in certain ways. And they just have to be worked with and comforted and just thinking outside the box, and a lot of times we do not support out of the box thinking. And, if we didn't have out of the box thinking, we wouldn't have things like what you guys are developing. That is something that's never truly existed before, that can also teach to foster creativity in a way that's never really been done. We don't really foster creativity in children. We start allowing people to take creative classes and things when they're adults, more or less, but actually being able to put there, it's exercising muscles in a way, and it's allowing them to communicate. There has been nonverbal autistic people who are also amazing writers. The fact they are nonverbal has absolutely nothing to do with their ability to emote or create words or create stories. And they can be great fiction writers. They can be great nonfiction writers, be great journalists. That the connection between, brain and verbalization, we put down a lot of these kids that they're lesser than other children because they're nonverbal or they communicate differently. But it does come down to they communicate differently. If the child is nonverbal, well, why aren't you trying to communicate in the way that they need to communicate instead of trying to make them communicate the way you communicate?
That's an excellent point, Mike, because too many times we do try to put people in the box, right? And actually, we punish people sometimes for being creative or I used to be in trouble all the time in school because I was a big daydreamer. So my teachers would always be yelling at me, Jay, quit looking out the window, pay attention. And I'm like, I understand what you're saying. I'm listening to you, but, my mind is, on that beautiful bird flying by or whatever.
Yeah, that was me. Somebody talks about daydreaming. That's how I spent my 16 years of education, looking out the window, and my teacher would always say, I'm going to throw you out the window.
I've heard that before.
So it's so funny, but then it does affect you, right? I mean, you don't even realize that is creativity, that imagination, that daydreaming is going off to some place. It's not empty. It's empty probably because it's in reference to the classroom, but it's doing something. It can just be empty. So that's how things get created, and you bring that to life. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so what does Burble how did that name come? What is there a meaning to it, or
Yeah, one of the things that Taylor does, our founder, is he's a big parachutist. So he's done thousands of base jumps. He's one of those people that breaks into buildings at night and goes up to the top floor and jumps off. And he jumps off of mountains and he flies in those wingsuits. And so burble is actually the air disturbance beneath a wing or above a wing. I'm not sure. I'm not an aeronautic person, but that's where that comes from, is just it has to do with aviation and flying. And that, that's one of his loves. So that's what burble became. But I think it's a great name for a company like ours because we're all about creativity outside the box. And you hear burble and you go, what is that?
Yeah, I love that. It almost sounds like a STEM sound, which is kind of like, it just seems fun to say. Going back to like the storytelling aspects of the tent, what are like the range of stories that are kind of going to be available and like what you kind of want to like grow into in regards to them? Like, is going to be like an educational component eventually to like the storytelling, or?
Yeah, we've had a lot of people ask us about education because I think it could be a very powerful way to do it. Initially, it's going to be mostly entertainment because we have to focus somewhere. And I think the storytelling aspect is great. But we've partnered with a group called Future House Productions. They're just a motion picture production studio that works in animation, and they're very creative. And so they're going to be helping us develop content. They're going to be kind of the content creators for the stories. Taylor knows how to create a minimally defined story, but we want to go into several different genres, as we go. And then, it'll be great by forming this community that we want to build. We'll be getting feedback all the time. Why don't you have a story about this? Why don't you have a story about that? Ultimately, I could see, the power of storytelling being used in a number of areas, including spiritual, meditation, religion. We don't want to get, too far off base, but I've been approached by a lot of different people about a lot of different ideas, and we want to incorporate them eventually. But for right now, I keep telling Taylor, we got to keep these blinders on and put one foot in front of the other and get this out, because the greatest technology in the world is useless if people don't have access to it.
Those things can grow into it, right? Because, and everything is easier when you tell it like a story. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Even the most complex things in education goes into our brains when it's narrated like a story.
And one of the things that we found is people will go in and they'll read a story, and then the next thing you know, they're telling each other stories. Like one of our kids that was in the tent was coming up with his own stories, and he was telling the stories to his parents, and they were amazed. They just loved the whole concept of, boy, we got his creative juices flowing, and now here comes stuff.
Once you pull down those gates, like the flood comes, and they've never been engaged in that particular way, and especially for a lot of them have probably either they've been told or they've inferred, because what neurodivergents do, we pick up on little cues, we pick up on the patterns. So we can infer that like, okay, we're not apparently particularly good at this, and this. And then suddenly you're being engaged in a way that your mind's actually going, and you're doing things that are either impressing people or impressing yourself. Impressing yourself goes really far whenever you're a kid, because you actually start to build some confidence where you maybe didn't have any before.
Right. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that so much, but you're right. It is going to help them as they develop to have that self-confidence. And, going back to the community, I could certainly see people coming up with story ideas and stories, and then sharing them with the community so that we can share stories with each other. And we're not going to try and limit creativity by any means.
That would be so cool, just being able to have that community aspect where you can share back and forth. Me and my kids, created this story, and or my child came up with this, or I came up with this because I know my child's really into this thing, so let's share it with all of these other kids. Like that the possibilities there are completely endless, and like being able to really tap into like what's going on with the child's mind in that way and share it with other kids.
Yep.
You know how some people are threatened by AI and taking away the creativity, but with companies like yours, you're creating that environment where you're actually creating from the right environment that is conducive, right? So nothing more powerful than the human soul to create. Right. So we don't have to be threatened by AI and use that for the right purposes, as you said, just the data. But yeah, I love what Burble does. And thank you so much for coming over and sharing your vision and the future.
Well, thank you. I love what Spark Launch is doing, and I wish you, great success. I mean, your success is our success as a human race. I mean, it's all about elevation, right? And I think we're in the right area to help people just be a better version of themselves.
Exactly. Be a better version of yourselves. I always say, like, you have to try to leave the world a little bit better than you found it. It's true of anything. And I think for a lot of us also, we've come from a place where these things weren't nurtured, where we kind of got left out in the dust, and we don't want to keep seeing that happening anymore. We don't want people to go through the same things we went through at their age or even older. Like, I mean, speaking for me, I'm late diagnosed, and I see just a sea of late diagnosed adults who are completely left out of the wind, who don't know who to go to, who to talk to. And I do like support groups and stuff, and I see a lot of them show up there. Every time there's a new person, 9 times out of 10, I was diagnosed a few years ago and I don't know what to do, and I don't know who I am anymore. And it's confusing. And we just don't want to see like those spaces go out there. We don't want to see people grow up who've been like thrown through a system that was never accommodating to them, and treated them like, because it wasn't accommodating to them, they're lesser in some way. And that even extends to home life, things that can help parents who maybe don't know what to do in those situations, or maybe even are neurodivergent themselves, and, can also benefit from some of the things that I know we're like all collectively working on.
Excellent point. Excellent. Because, even a neurodivergent parent may not recognize the particular diversive aspect that their child is displaying, right? And it's really, really an interesting area, because I think giving kids the ability to explore their imaginations and develop their own superpowers is something that we've never really done before. We've never given people reign over that. And I think that's one of the benefits of technology, is the fact that we find that we're not alone. There are other people with this problem. There are other people who have handled it this way. And I think that's going to be one of the powerful aspects of developing these communities. And we're seeing it already through the media, but I think it can really be amplified through the efforts of, say, a Spark Launch or a Burble Creativity or a Cogno or people like that.
Where can everybody like find the crowdfunding campaign, and like what can they do to get involved?
Burble Creativity is the name of our company, and it's the name of our website. And if they go to our website, they can find out all about the tent, how it works. We've got videos. And then if they are interested in investing, there's just a little button at the top that says you can find out about investing in Burble. They can click that, and it takes them to a different site that explains the whole investment aspect.
That's awesome. And I'll be sure to include also all those in the show notes for everybody who's interested. I think I can already actually think some people that I may send this to that might be particularly interested, especially some family members. And yeah, more the merrier, of course. And not that I also myself am not interested, to be honest with you. I'm always also looking at the bed tents that are available that, tend to go to neurodivergent kids. And it always seems wonderful to me. I've always been someone since a kid who sleeps with like a blanket and pillow like over their head. And it's amazing. I never thought I was autistic until I was like 30. But yeah, I mean, this is absolutely incredible. And what you're doing and the community aspect of it is so, so very important. And I love that we've been able to have you on to talk about it and to learn about it. And I would love to have you back on after it launches, after you kind of like have everything wrapped up, and to check in and see how like everything's going, how it's evolving, and what kind of feedback you've gotten. I would love to like have you on as Burble grows.
Well, I appreciate that. And we would love to share some of our success, later this summer when we've got the tents out and we're getting responses from the families, because I think that will be the most important thing is how we're making an impact. I'd love to be able to share that with the community.
Awesome. It would be great to do that. And I just want to thank you again for coming on. This has been really good, and I look forward to learning more.
Well, I thank you both for having me and sharing my story and Burble's story, and I look forward to us helping kids find a better way in the world.
Then I will say for Jay, for myself, and for Chaya, we will see you next time.